Are you related to the Merkles that kind of ran Montana Power back in the 90s? Oh, they were big investors and all kinds of things. No? So the dividend check from Montana Power is not yet in the mail?
I would want to
Yeah?
get up.
Let me know, Patricia. Okay, it's 9 o'clock, 9:01. We have a small technical difficulty. We'll start in a moment. Time is 9:01. The place is the Bollinger Room. I am Brad Molnar. I am the chairman for this meeting, which is an informational meeting on the wildfire mitigation plan being worked on by Northwestern Energy. Joining me today in person are Commissioner Fielders and Commissioner Vukacek. Are the other two online? Okay, and we're it. So we're a quorum. There is no script for an informational meeting, I've been told, so we're going to wing it. Gentlemen and lady, whoever is going to present, please do so.
Good morning, commissioners. Today I have with me, I'm Jason Merkel. I'm the Vice President of Distribution for Northwestern Energy. And I have with me our Manager of Asset Management, Brandy Hillwinkle, and then our Director of Wildfire Operations, Nate Linder. We're going to take a little time here today to go through a summary level of our wildfire mitigation plan. We do intend to cover some detail on how we arise to specifically the risk that's within our system and within Montana. And then we will also cover some of our approaches to both identifying and developing strategies to mitigate those risks. You have the hard copy in front of you. We also have a deck that we're going to go through on the screen. Don't be too overwhelmed by the thickness of the deck. There's a lot of the slides are transitionary, and then there are some information slides. So we won't cover all of that presentation in detail, but it is available for you all. So we will, with your permission, we'll jump right in and please feel free to ask questions as we go. I'm hoping to make this a bit of a discussion. If you do ask a question and we feel we're going to touch on that question, I'll just, with your permission, I'll push the question and then make sure that we cover your questions in entirety. So we'll jump right in. We do plan, as I described, to cover our wildfire mitigation plan, why we believe that it meets the requirements of law. We will touch on our risk modeling and then how we make informed decisions to mitigate those risks. And then overall, how our plan sets us up for addressing what we can address today and set us up for the future. And then last but not least, much of the plan is about communication with the public. So we'll touch on that as well. So diving right into this, I'm on page 4. And I think it's important to understand our history and what led up to the wildfire mitigation plans. And we've, at Northwestern Energy, we've been mitigating wildfire risk, probably before it actually had a name within the industry. We got our start largely focusing on asset replacement, asset refurbishment. And if some of you may remember we went through a period where we were very focused on distribution system integrity. That led to transmission, substation, and other assets. And uh, that was a lot of replacement. I like to think of it as we were stabilizing our assets, we were stabilizing the reliability of our electric systems during that period. We had the vegetation management space, uh, because of the mountain pine beetle. We were able to jump into that probably earlier than most. Uh, that infestation that occurred on much of our right-of-ways, over 11 or 1,200 miles, subject to check, but were impacted by the mountain pine beetle. And we, in 2019, at kind of the height of the issues around that, we began a hazard tree program that focused on dead or dying trees within the right of way. That ultimately led to expanding outside of our right of way and dealing with risk trees that exist outside the right of way. One of the major benefits of that program is it really became the driver of some really solid relationships that we developed with um, agencies such as Forest Service, DNRC, where we were working in concert to address those issues specifically outside of our right of way. And we begin the steps of coordination of their programs and our programs to address vegetation management. Then in 2021, what was going on in the industry at that time, by this time, by 2021, there were many tragic events, specifically in California, where wildfire was a headline for many utilities and causing bankruptcy and other issues across the western part of the United States. As California was first in the game, many of the utilities in the Northwest region got together and we came together under a group called the Pacific Northwest Utility Working Wildfire Group. And we began to assess what each other were doing to address this wildfire mitigation. We were hearing what was going on in California, what they were doing to address, and there were components of it where we questioned whether that would be right for our regions, whether it be too aggressive or it just simply didn't apply given the differences in density of customers. Ultimately, we worked towards developing our first draft of our plan. That was in 2022. And since then, we are now on our third version. Most recently, we released a version in May, and then we did some slight modifications to the 3.0 version. The minor revision of 3.1 is actually a current version that's available on the website. So that's a little history of how we got to where we're at. One thing that hasn't changed in any of the versions of the WMP are our objectives, and that is to reduce the ignition potential, to monitor both our system and the environment, enhance and continue to enhance our vegetation management programs, and then also one of the biggest and probably the most complex components of the plan is how do you reach the public, um, and realize that wildfire, although it impacts the utility and how we operate. Wildfire truly is a community issue, a society issue that we're faced with.
That's a question right there.
Please.
Okay, when you say reach the community, are you talking about when there's a fire, when there's a de-energization, when there's increased fire risk, or just in general? What does reach the community mean to you in this context?
Almost all of the above. If we will talk about, we have to have a de-energization plan. So just the fact that you could shut off the power is for this risk, for this purpose. It's from my perspective, is a major paradigm shift. Not only for our customers, but I would even say for our employees. I've been with the company for over 30 years, and during that time, my goal as an employee was to keep the power on, and if the power goes out, get it back on as quickly as you possibly can. And managing wildfire risk has changed that for much of the year. That statement's still true. But when the hazards exist, we shift from being reliability focused in our operations to shifting to being risk-based focused and changing the operations. So from that communication perspective, we know that we had and have had to work with the agencies across Montana. We've been effective in doing that for the last several years. We've met with the DNRC countless times, as well as the DES agencies such as Red Cross and many of those public governmental agencies that focus on tragedy when wildfire is present, and working with them to coordinate. We've also, it's been part of our mission to help them with their mission. Things like defensible spaces for homes and communities. Those programs have been around for a long time. And we've focused to help spread that message and help customers and our Montana citizens to help understand the issue and what they can do to defend themselves from wildfire, regardless of the ignition.
More specifically, and this is actually an old question, I guess, because when I was on interim energy, I asked it. Okay, so if there is a fire, if there's a de-energization based on, self-defense, power line goes down because of a lightning strike. There was no real time to get into all of that. You have people up and down the mountains, etc., that are going to be affected. And communications are going to be spotty in a lot of that. We're not going to have cell phone service. They're not going to have Wi-Fi. They're not going to have computers. Not that they'd be sitting there looking at their computers during this. How do you intend to notify them in general? And how do you intend to notify them specifically if they have electronically powered medically necessary devices?
Commissioner, if I can ask you to hold that question, I think we're going to cover PSPS under some depth.
I'm the most compliant, non-pugilistic individual you ever met. Just let me know when it's a good time for me to rephrase, state it, or if you're just going to go into it, that's fine with me.
Actually, I've asked Brandy for any questions that come up to write those down. So to make sure that we come back.
So I was watching that. I didn't know if she was doodling or writing or what.
No, to make sure that we cover all your questions. But,
okay.
But I think if we get through this, I think
if you can't cover them here, just note that you'll get back to us at your earliest convenience. I'd appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you, President. So moving along, we talked about the 4 objectives of the plan. And I think it's uh, it should be noted that as you look across most all the plans that I've seen across the industry, um, the objectives for utilities co-ops, regardless if they're IOUs or electric co-ops, the objectives are generally very close to the same. And the categories, although they might be called something slightly different, the categories to address those objectives are all approximately the same, regardless of what state, where they reside, uh, very similar in terms of what the industry has come up with. For Northwestern Energy, this the on slide 6, you can see the 5 categories that we will be talking about more here today. First is situational awareness, and that's both to monitor our systems and how they're operating, as well as the environment. Operational practices, we will, depending on the risk level, the wildfire risk level that exists environmentally, we will adjust our operations in how we either accept or an outage and the rate at which we will accept an outage adjusts by that operational practice. The other thing that changes within operational practices not only is how we adjust our system, but where our personnel will perform work at certain times of the year is also adjusted based on the risk level. And then we'll talk about system preparedness. Often that's called grid hardening. That's the work that you're doing on the assets to improve or adjust the performance of the assets. Vegetation management speaks for itself. And then again, one category is describing how we will perform communication and outreach, not only about the wildfire mitigation plan, but also about de-energization when it's necessary. Slide 7. These are, as we see it, the requirements that are stated within the plan. And we believe that we have a plan that meets all of those requirements as stated. And we'll cover this in more depth. I'm now moving to slide 9. So one of the requirements that's required within law is that we identify our risk. And I will describe that this has been a bit of an evolution for Northwestern Energy. Initially, we didn't have our risk identified. We leveraged many outside parties like FEMA, the wildfire hazard potential that you see here, I believe was developed by the Forest Service, WHP, other agencies such as that, and how they've seen risk in Montana is what we used, at least initially. The problem that we were running into is the way they would identify risk was through their lens for their purposes. And we definitely understood the need to identify risk from a power line perspective. So this served us well initially. On slide 9 here, you'll see the WHP. I think our first draft really, from a consequence standpoint, we leveraged that information. You'll also see just I think it's 17 years of historical wildfires that occurred in Montana. And the reason why I like that slide is I think there are many that associate wildfire risk to Western Montana because that's where all the trees are. What this denotes is that wildfires occur all over in our boundaries, which states that the risk is everywhere, but the risk is not the same everywhere. And we'll get into that as well. Another thing that I think is driving risk for many utilities, and specifically in Montana, if you look at uh, Montana, a few other of the darker states that are within that map on the lower right, what that's really depicting is that 60% or greater of the new development that is occurring in Montana is occurring in the WUI, which is the um, wildfire urban interface. So, simply put, those that are moving into the state or that are looking for their piece of the pie of the state, they're choosing to build and construct, moreover, outside of town. And they're really like all of us want is to be right up against the wild Montana interface. That's creating problems for us and just where people are choosing to live. The slide 10, um, what when we identified our own risk or the risk that that Northwestern faces through our lens, we used two components, the probability and the consequence. So we first looked at our assets, and that's one thing that all of that work that we've been doing since the mid 2000s really gave us a leg up on by comparison to many other utilities, is we have a lot of information and data around our systems. We've been doing inspections to help drive our reliability projects and efforts through the infrastructure programs that we were doing at the time. So we have good information by comparison with many other utilities as we talk through. I think that's one thing they're very impressed with about Northwestern is the immense amount of data that we have to help drive decisions. I really applaud our asset management group. We go to conferences, and I don't know how many times we've had other utilities come in to do some show and tell on how we utilize our data. So very proud of that, and it's really helped us uh, with understanding risk and how do we apply programs to maximize mitigation efforts, uh, both from an overcoming risk and also from being as cost effective as we possibly can.
Mr. Merkel, under ignition probability and asset health on this slide, you list pull rate. Can you explain what pull rate is, please?
Yes, we have inspectors, Vice President, that we inspect all of our system. We actually have an outside party come in, and they'll do an asset health inspection. And so they'll rate our pulls, one being brand new, a 5 being rejected and needs to be replaced. During the infrastructure programs that we had in the early 2000s, I believe now we are on our second cycle. We did a 10-year cycle in 5 years in order to improve our reliability from 2013 to 2018. So we are now in our second cycle of going through our assets and specifically the poles. During those programs, we focused on replacing all 4 and 5 rated poles during those programs. So the asset health is defined by a number 1, you're going to have a higher asset score than you would if you had a number 3, for example. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Can I follow up real quick?
Please.
Okay, I don't understand that rating your poles. Are we talking your wooden poles or are we talking your steel structures or what are we talking here?
Uh, the program I just spoke to is for our wood poles. And what we were doing is that anything that was rated a 4 or 5 was ultimately rejected. And anything that was rated a number 3, we would also treat that pole while we were doing the inspection.
Treat it in what way?
It's a preservative that's actually injected into the pole in order to extend the life of that pole.
Okay, here's where I'm getting confused on this.
Okay.
Okay, so they're rated from 1 to 5. 4 and 5 are, I guess, replaced. Number 3 is treated with some sort of a, like that green stuff they put on
Yep.
fence posts.
Yep.
In a forest fire, whether it's a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 5, it's going to burn. So it might not blow down, but it will burn up. So exactly, if you're not hardening it against fire, even if it's a 1 or a 2, if it's a very healthy 18-inch diameter lodgepole pine filled with sap green and it rained recently, it's going to burn. So will your pole. I don't see exactly what you're accomplishing here in the way of wildfire mitigation.
Thank you, President. And you make a really good point that I was hoping to be able to discuss. Because when we talk about risk and wildfire mitigation, we don't look to defend our assets. That's not a primary objective for us. We're looking to defend the public and to defend homes and structures and forests and watersheds. That's what we look to defend. If you look year over year on how many poles and how many structures we have, and we can get this information. I don't have the details of the cost, but we don't lose very many assets to fire. And what we do is commensurate to, I'm sure we lose more in winter storms due to icing and those types of problems for our assets. So if this program was about defending our assets, it would be a much more expensive program. And the fact of the matter is, where do you start? Where do you defend? Now, we do defend some of our assets. I can give you a good example. We have a couple of 230s that run from Broadview substation into Billings. Those 2 lines are parallel lines. They're 230,000 volt lines, and they're critical to the operation of Billings. So that would be an example of assets that we will defend from fire, because if we lose those assets, our ability to recover would be challenging, and it would impact the customers of Billings greatly. But as I talk about wildfire mitigation, we're not focused on defending our assets.
I'm not talking about defending your assets either. I'm talking about wildfire mitigation. So if you have wooden poles in areas of high relative risk and concern, they're going to burn. And that's going to be spotty, I think. You're going along, you're in Forest Service, a lot of heat, they're going to burn. Half a mile later, for the next 3 miles, they're in sagebrush covered hills before you get to more Forest Service-y looking country. They're not going to burn. The grass is 6 inches high and the cows grazed it down. There's not enough fuel there to burn a pole. But a wooden pole anywhere that goes down and starts a fire that adds to the existing fire is high risk. So to identify at 1 to 5 does not help What we're talking about today, unless I'm wrong, wildfire mitigation. It's a burning pole. So maybe a different composite, a different treatment. I don't know what it is. BPA testified that they treat their poles with some sort of a wrap so that they don't burn. I'm not hearing that here. I really don't mean to use up all of our time on this one issue. Maybe we need to discuss it later. Come to my office, put your feet up, bring the coffee and the donuts. I'll talk forever. But for right now, for this purpose, I'm not seeing that identifying wooden poles from 1 to 5 and replacing 4 and 5, treating number 3, is actually a wildfire mitigation risk that would belong on that part of the billing. It would be more of a part of the standard operation that you've always done with poles that are old, perhaps worm-eaten, rotting off the base. It's what you always do. Or am I not correct in what I'm seeing here?
Well, I think you are correct in what you're saying. I mean, first of all, what I told you, what we were doing with those DSIP programs and those asset programs, those programs they started in 2013. They've been going on. They're not part of the mitigation plan, but they are important to understanding the asset health that's out there. And what is the probability that that pole will go over and start a fire? So having a rated 1 through 5 does help to understand what is the asset health and the performance capability of that asset. And that all leads into the probability of having a power line issue that could ignite a fire.
Mr. Merkel, I think I see where you're going with this because you've identified this pole rate under your ignition probability. And so you're not looking at it from the standpoint necessarily of when there's a fire, protecting your pole. You're looking at it in terms of preventing the pole from falling over and causing a fire. Is that correct? Reducing ignition probability.
Yes, well stated, Commissioner. That's exactly
Thank you.
what I'm describing. So that's all the probability perspective. And how do you get to asset health? And how do you understand the performance capability of your assets? And then you also, uh, we have to look at the consequence. So if you were to ignite a fire and propagated by heavy winds, what would be the consequence of a fire starting somewhere on our line? We actually went through modeling to understand what our consequence was. And what we did virtually using a contractor is we lit a fire virtually in a model every 200 feet, 200 meters, pardon me, 200 meters on 25,000, 18,000 miles of power line. We have 25,000 miles, but 7,000 miles are underground. So on all of our overhead power line every 200 meters, and then we applied kind of a Monte Carlo type of modeling. It ran thousands of separate models, given historical wind patterns for each ignition to be able to understand what would be the consequence if a fire started at a certain point on our power line. That's how we established consequence. So again, it's not what a fire will do to us, but if a fire was started by our power line, what would be the impact to the public and the communities?
Mr. Merkel, you may address this later, but you just piqued my interest in the topic of how many, you've got a percentage of your lines that are underground versus above ground. And are you going to be addressing how those determinations are made later, or can you nutshell for us how you make those decisions?
We're actually going to get specifically into that subject.
Thank you.
So to leave this slide, all of Montana has risk. But we need to determine a relative risk because not all of our line segments have the same level of risk to this issue. So we'll speak in relative risk. Again, all of Montana has risk, but we've defined is a level of relative risk. I'm going to turn this over to Brandy Hellwinkle to go through the infrastructure resiliency model that Vice President Fielder specifically gets to your question.
Thanks, Jason. You guys hear me okay? Very good. So as Jason just described, Northwestern uses an infrastructure resiliency model to determine that relative risk. And there really is three purposes of this model: identify the location of risk, identify the type of risk, and then ultimately use it as a prioritization method. So what you're looking at here is really dives into how we understand what type is present in a specific location. So our entire distribution and transmission system is assigned what we call a quadrant. The quadrants are defined by that system probability on the y-axis, the consequence on the x-axis, using the factors that Jason just spoke to. So for example, if a section of line is in quadrant 1, we would know that it has a high system probability based on both that asset design and that asset history, and a high consequence based on that fire spread model that Jason spoke to. In that case, we know that the appropriate mitigation for that quadrant 1 would be kind of a multi-layered approach. So we would look towards mitigation strategies such as hardening, enhanced assessments and repairs, vegetation management to reduce that system probability, ultimately reducing that ignition potential. And then we would employ things such as technology, situational awareness to monitor the current conditions based on that high consequence factor. Should the current conditions warrant, we would then adjust our operational practices to manage that risk based on that high consequence factor. In contrast, if a section were in quadrant 3, that would indicate that there's a low system probability. So that may be a new asset, an asset that was previously hardened. However, the operating condition of that asset lies within a high consequence area. So a hardening approach is not the highest value approach. The better mitigation would be that technology situational awareness, where we can really monitor what's going on, what's being forecasted, and then adjust the way we operate that system during that time of potential elevated risk.
Ms. Hellwinkle, I see you use the word SA here a lot, and I don't see what the abbreviation stands for.
Thanks, Vice President Fielder. That's situational awareness. That's one of the categories within the plan.
Thank you.
So by using this model, it really helps to determine what is the best mitigation strategy for every location based on the type of risk present. Nate, if you'll go to the next slide, we'll talk about what that actually looks like. So what you're looking at here is our transmission and distribution system. This is the model results. This is our 25 model, so it's based on 24 data. And you're seeing a lot of dots up here on the screen. So you can see those 4 quadrant I just spoke to. Our transmission system is broken into approximately 5-mile sections. So there's approximately 2,000 dots there on the transmission side. Distribution, we break those into what we call an ESID, an electric section ID. That's a portion of our system between protective devices. There's 34,000 dots there approximately. One thing I want to point out here is the percentages. So based on the relative risk you see on transmission, approximately 4% of our system is in that quadrant 1, which would apply for all of those, or which would qualify for all of those mitigation strategies I just spoke to. In distribution, you can see there's approximately a little less than 2% of our system in that quadrant 1. You had asked about underground. On the distribution side, you see that the majority of our system, approximately 60% of distribution, is in that green quadrant. That would be where our underground would lie, just based on that system probability and consequence score. Jason, would you like to add to this?
Yes, thanks, Brandy. It, this really is a bit of, if you think of our system as how are you going to eat this elephant? Because it's a big, wide, large service area territory that we serve, and a lot of miles and a lot of risk. And this is our approach to understanding which strategy is going to be the most effective to address risk for a particular segment. And again, we have 650 some circuits. Uh, I have one example that comes to mind that's several hundred miles. It runs out near Melville out of Big Timber. This approach, rather than rebuilding that whole segment that does contain risk, what this approach allows you to do is to understand within that 200 miles of a single distribution circuit, which of those specific miles are causing you risk. And rather than reconstructing from A to Z on that whole section, you would apply only the strategies that's going to affect the most mitigation. That's our approach. We have a good portion of our system that falls into the yellow. That means that from a relative basis, the system is fairly healthy and performs well. President Molnar, you talked about steel poles and the work that we're doing there, because we have a lot of them. We have a lot of steel poles specifically on our transmission. And often those assets will fall into the yellow. We still need to monitor the environment. We still need to adjust our operations because even the best performing asset can fail. So we would be applying in the yellow or the gold that's on that map. That's where we're full-blown situational awareness, and we're using technology to adjust our system when the environment tells us we should. This really is an approach that we've discussed with many other utilities. And again, because of the immense amount of performance data that we had, I think we're fairly unique in our approach, but I also will say it's coveted by other utilities, that we have the data to be able to cost effectively guide where we need to be mitigating versus starting at the beginning and replacing everything new. Next slide. I wish Commissioner Pinocci was here because he wanted to see a map. Well, these next two slides are for Commissioner Pinocci. This would represent, if you look at, this is for distribution, and every one of those segments, every one of those 34,000 segments are identified on that spatial map. And it shows which quadrant you would fall into, and therefore which mitigation strategy we would be focused on and prioritize. Next slide. This is our same slide to represent our transmission system. And you can see we have a lot of yellow, which would indicate we have good performing transmission systems, good health. But we still need to monitor them and adjust their operation. The one thing I do want to point out is, although age, and I know this really, really well, although age is a driver of performance, it's not the only factor to look at to determine performance. So I was prepared to have the conversation with Commissioner Panochi because he wanted to see a map with age and age only. I was going to assert to him that we went further than that. We're looking at all the factors that would indicate a relative difference in the way an asset's performance, including outage history, inspection data, age, and et cetera. Vice President Fielder, you asked a question that I said we were going to dive into. Did that help with your question?
Well, you touched on the amount of risk dealing with the underground and the above line, but where I was going at is why not just underground it all, or why not just underground the red, quadrant 1 areas? Can you address what kind of decision making and what kind of logistics go into that kind of a decision?
Yeah, I think this slide will help with that. Make sure I get this question answered. But so if you look at strategies, remember I told you we had 5 categories. One is public outreach and from managing the asset. I'm going to remove that one from the screen because it really doesn't necessarily help you with managing the asset necessary, but it doesn't help you. So there are 5 up here. Asset or assessment and repair is also part of our system performance, grid hardening efforts. But if you look at this slide, to get to your question, what you're talking about is grid hardening. Why not just underground it all? And the real answer is time and money, because it would take a lot of both in order to just transition everything to underground as being the lowest risk mitigation strategy. If you could get to that, it would be impractical from a cost perspective. And even if you chose to do that mitigation strategy, it took us decades to build this system. It would take us decades to achieve that level of mitigation. But when you think about that, we need to continue to do asset replacement and even shift to undergrounding. So anything that fell into that red category could be each one of those segments. The way our program works is we apply what is the best grid hardening strategy for that segment. Now we have some segments that are in forested areas that maybe serve a communication tower along highways that it's just challenging from vegetation management and mini drivers like that, where we're choosing to underground the entire segment. We have other segments that don't have all those issues, and our choice is to do some sort of a rebuild, either replace some of the assets. Often we can just change the configuration and we can improve the performance of the asset, overhead or other. So what this slide gets into is on the right y-axis, you can see the amount of investment level that's needed by that particular strategy, maximum investment. And on the x-axis, it's going to take a lot of time to be able to achieve a mitigated state. Conversely, if you look at the lower 2, and by the way, those asset repair, vegetation management, grid hardening, they also improve your reliability of your asset for our customers. Where when you look at the other 2, enhanced power line safety settings, also known as EPSS, fast trip. It's often called, where you trip a line as soon as you even believe you have an issue, you trip the line. And then also in that same space is, if it's too risky to even energize your lines, you just shut the power lines off, or PSPS. Those two conversely, they hurt reliability because you're inviting an outage. You're forcing an outage. But I will tell you that those particular defenses, or those mitigation strategies, you can get to fairly quickly. You can apply technology on the system, and you can monitor the environment when the environment suggests you should do something different. You use those mitigation strategies in order to deal with the risks that are apparent right now, because you need to mitigate the risk in order to reduce ignitions. And if you had to wait for the grid hardening to underground everything, how many events would you have before you got to that mitigated state? So you need all of these factors, EPSS, PSS, or PSPS. Those are the strategies that we're using short term. As we continue to enhance vegetation management, grid hardening, we're assessing 100% of our distribution system annually, where we used to assess 50% annually. Those type of programs are getting us to a healthier performing system. But in the time it takes to get there, we are going to have to leverage certainly EPSS and PSPS. Vice President Fielder, does that help with your question?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not going to go through this slide. It pretty much reinforces and states what I've already talked about. I'll just call your attention to all of this starts with a healthy performing system. You need grid hardening. I think we got a leg up on overall wildfire mitigation because of where we've been from a health and performance. All of those system integrity programs that are not identified within our program, but they've helped us. Our wildfire mitigation strategies have helped us. Commissioner, you're going to ask a question.
Before you get to the next slide, the last slide that has the reliability, impact, investment level, risk mitigation. I mean, obviously, all these decisions to purchase or not, or to replace or not, or to fix or not, it involves a very complex analysis. And the latest, greatest grid hardening strategies, all the wonderful things that are out there and available, you always have to look at cost benefit, and that cost is ultimately going to go to the ratepayer. Is that correct?
Yes, it will. And that's why with the use of these strategies, we believe that we're using the most cost-effective approach for our customers. There are some utilities that they haven't been where we've been. And when you talk with those utilities, they're having to put an immense amount of money into grid hardening. We need to continue to keep our system reliable, but we're starting at a different place. I'll tell you, our greatest opportunity 2.5 years ago was to develop the least cost strategies, because we didn't have those developed. And that is PSPS and enhanced power line safety settings. We didn't have good strategies 3 years ago. We have great strategies today. And all of that was centered on, you need one thing in order to be good at those two. And that's good situational awareness. You need to have programs, models that are evaluating where are you at from a risk perspective today in this hour, and where are those segments that are causing risk and alter their operation. You can't do any of those programs. In fact, you can't, in my opinion, you can't be effective with PSPS, shutting the power off, unless you truly understand when do you shut it off and when is it safe to turn it back on. And you can't do that without situational awareness. And that's a really good lead in, Commissioner, because I'm going to turn this over to Nate to talk through.
Can I go a couple more slides back?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
so back to the quadrants and the yellow quadrant, you said that's where you have a lot of the steel poles. And I'm wondering if you put those steel poles in there because they were higher risk before, or are they in there and that's why they're a lower risk? Wondering which came first, or
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
Some of it is like one line that just came to mind. We didn't replace poles or rebuild those lines because of wildfire mitigation. They were part of our capacity upgrades, and the type of line has changed. We've gone often from two pole structures to single pole structures with steel or with transmission. And that drives you to steel because once you get above a certain height of your conductors, it's just hard to get a tree that's that tall, that strong. So you either end up with a laminated wood type design or you go with steel. And steel's been the choice that we've been employing. Often with the new lines that we've been constructing, there's an example near Monarch. There's one just north of town between East Helena and Holter. Those are steel pole structures. They contain advanced conductor. It's all of the modern build that you would build for the reason of a total line reconstruct. Does that help?
I believe Commissioner Walborn has a question, possibly Jason.
Oh,
No, I do, but I'll wait for a while.
Uh,
It was not
Commissioner
necessarily
Welborn.
brought forward.
Commissioner Wellborn has his hand up on the.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Merkel, I just, when you were talking about how things have changed a lot in the last 3 years, and you kind of boiled it down to situational awareness, it is, I guess, the way I'm understanding that, and correct me if I'm wrong, situational awareness, like bringing, you know, your training programs to like the line crews and field engineers and the folks out on the ground to kind of be on the same wave as, you know, the kind of what you're going through in this presentation this morning, and training them up, or what is that situational awareness?
Well, what we're describing as situational awareness, we'll get through. It's the tools that we use to monitor the environment. It's the weather, it's the modeling that we've done, and how all of that fits together with performance of our system, performance health. That's all what we use situational awareness or to understand the situation, both from an environment perspective and from a system perspective. And then, yes, Commissioner Welborn, from a cultural standpoint, again, I described to you the paradigm shift I've had to go through. We had to educate all of our employees to understand that during certain times of the year, it's not our priority to get that power on as quickly as we possibly can. We're going to get it on as quickly as we can with understanding the risk. And that might drive us to patrol a whole line segment that tripped or was de-energized before energization. And yes, we've had to work with our employees to understand that change in priority, if you will, when the environment dictates that.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Nate?
Thanks, Jason. And I think that was a really timely question by Commissioner Wellborn, because we're going to touch on that maybe a little more in depth through these next few slides. And really, I think pausing here really fast, talking about these two strategies that are kind of highlighted in red, both EPSS and the PSPS strategies really require sound situational awareness to understand when to deploy those. So what is situational awareness? I almost feel like Commissioner Welborn, I had a canned question there, so I appreciate that. Situational awareness to us really is taking that static model that we talked about before, the infrastructure resiliency model, and then layering on top of that the daily wildfire risk. And so we can combine those things together spatially to really get at across our entire T&D network. So that'd be over the 34,000 distribution ESIDs and the 2,000 plus transmission sections. What is the risk in that area? And once we understand that, we can understand we have this tiered approach of what is the individual situation going on for each of those segments. So we've built a number of situational awareness dashboards over the last, I'll say, 18 months, 24 months. We have our transmission system, we have our distribution system. Specifically, another question Commissioner Wellborn spoke to was, how do our employees work on the system? We have a dashboard and a mobile dashboard that helps them understand the wildfire risk and their current location. So a lot of exciting technology that we're deploying, all to help us understand the wildfire risk locally and where they're working. So this is kind of in the background there. You'll see what our dashboard looks like, and this is available to all company employees every day. They're able to review this information and make operational decisions based on that. This provides a 7-day outlook, so not only will they see today, they'll also see what's coming throughout the rest of the week. And then we have a tiered approach, and so we can set up our system and almost encourage an outage, if you want to say it that way. And when risk is unacceptably high, we're going to start pulling back on how reliable our system is. We're going to invite an outage. We're going to limit the amount of fault energy that can be, in an area where you may have some wildfire risk. And so we go through a tiered system from low to extreme, and each day we are adjusting our system based on that. So here's maybe a quick example or a quick description of what is Enhanced Powerline Safety Settings, EPSS. Again, Jason called it Fast Trip, and this is a technology that has been around, for decades, since the electric system was first put in place. We've had abilities to reliably operate the system. Well, this is using that same technology and using it for a wildfire mitigation risk perspective. So under normal operations, these line reclosures, right, can be out on the system. The electric current passes through the reclosure and, then reliably serves our customers. Under a fire risk scenario, if there were some fault condition, whether that be vegetation or for some reason they had a line break, that recloser can sense that fault and de-energize the system very quick. So we're going to set that to a non-reclose status. We are going to minimize the fault energy that's available. So we are sacrificing a little bit of our reliability metric, but we're also minimizing, the opportunities for any faults turning into ignition. Yeah.
One thing to add on this, we're within our wildfire mitigation strategy, we are actively looking to put where there were hydraulic, more manually operated hydraulic, it requires somebody to go out and change the setting to get from normal setting to a fast trip state. One of the initiatives that we're looking to do within our wildfire plan is to actually put more electronic devices in replace of those hydraulics. What that allows us to do is, instead of having to drive 4 or 5 hours to get to one of these and to change its setting. And then perhaps tomorrow or tonight it rains, and tomorrow to get back into normal operation mode, you'd have to send somebody out on that same drive to put it back to normal operations. We're actively changing. We have 1,300 or so distribution reclosures on our system. We have currently about 300 to 350 electronic reclosures that we can actually adjust the state of those operations directly from our control center. And we can do that within the hour. So if you go through a period where the wildfire risk is worse in the afternoon, but it's okay in the evening and in the morning, we can gain back that reliability through these electronic devices. So that is one of our ways to preserve reliability, but still be able to operate as effectively as we can in a risk-based mode.
Chase. So moving on to a public safety power shutoff, this can be both a complex subject and one that really can be boiled down kind of to another quadrant based. And really, there is a time when things become just unacceptably, risky to operate the system. It's very limited, but there are conditions out there, in the dead of summer, where we haven't had any moisture for quite some time. You may be operating a system that maybe not be, as Brandy described, it might be one of our tiers that has maybe not as high as health as others. It also could be low relative humidity, and fuels are ready to burn. You fold in a little wind component in the middle of all that, and that's really where you're going to have a catastrophic wildfire. And that's one of the things we're really wanting to avoid with this program is avoiding those catastrophic wildfires, the fires that our fire agencies are not able to defend those structures. They're just going to take off on their own, and you almost have to sit back and watch them. So we want to avoid that opportunity for that system. This weekend might have been a good example of a summer day, right? We had nice weather, at least in Helena we did. I didn't travel outside of Helena, but from an outage probability standpoint, very low. We didn't have any weather that was maybe causing harm on our system. But we still have fires in the state. We have over 40 fires right now burning. We got a lot of rain this summer, but the fuels are still able to go. So that's an opportunity to deploy our enhanced power line safety settings. And if you have, a squirrel get onto our line and make contact, that fault condition, we're hoping to minimize that to avoid that fire. More than likely, that ignition would not turn into a catastrophic wildfire. And we're talking fires that, run for days or for months and consume a lot of structures. Those fires usually can be contained. PSPS are the ones that are high wind, high temps, fuels are dried out, very dangerous. We combine those, and we also have to look at the public safety aspect of it. What customers are impacted. So these are not just thresholds that we set, and if we hit these thresholds, we automatically shut the power off. There's a lot of human intervention here and decision making that happens, and quite a few checkpoints along the way. And what does that look like? I mean, this is the next slide kind of shows kind of our phased and staggered approach. We have a 7-phase system in which we kind of move from monitoring all the way through the outage itself. And then, there's going to be a certain amount of time where the system is de-energized. And then we go through our restoration phases and then close out. And through all of that, right, we're monitoring it the entire time. This could be across 34,000 segments on the distribution. We are monitoring each of those for how we would perform a PSPS.
Commissioner, President Molnar, you asked
When I'm sitting on a meeting like this, I'm actually chairman. I carry more titles than you are.
Okay.
Than you necessarily need to
all right.
memorize.
Yes.
Because I get confused, but
thank
sitting
you.
here, I'm chairman of this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You asked a question kind of at the onset of this meeting. When do we reach out to the community, before, during, after? How do you notify during an event to communicate to customers? and also asked about those customers with medical sensitive needs. This chart is in a planned situation of PSPS. This is how the company would communicate. So several days prior, when we see that weather event coming, we're going to begin the conversation. Admittedly, when you're in a watch phase, it's going to be we may be shutting out the power on this day. And as you move closer to that decision to shut off the power, so you're concerned about, at least in the beginning, those customers are notified before they're out of power. That's our plan. Before communications loss, before they don't have good access to communication because they don't have power. And then the communications continue. We have within our program, when we can isolate where an outage will occur as part of our plan, is to set up and let them know beforehand where we'll be located so they can get more information. Our plan incorporates a generator or a generator location, a place where they can get power, whether that's commercial power generation, where we can continue the communication throughout the outage event and continue to work with those customers. As far as the medical needs, we're working with agencies like the Red Cross to understand how we can be the most effective in doing that. We do have a preference center option that we just actually, it went live in first quarter of this year, that I believe is going to give us the technology, if you're an individual with medical needs, that you can actually have either your vendor, your doctor, or somebody else be notified when you're receiving these notifications, so that that vendor, let's say you're on oxygen, that vendor could have, and we still need to work with the vendors across the state of Montana, that's part of that communication plan. It could be an option where they would be notified to know you're out of power, and you have that relationship with your vendor to be able to activate, hey, do you have enough oxygen? Do you have enough of whatever it is that you need to get you through this event? That's the direction that we're going. I will tell you, we're not all the way there yet. And I think many of the agencies that we work with struggle with the same thing. How do you know who needs what? And how do you help them? But part of our PSPS is to actually be active on-site location so that we can understand the needs of our customers. And again, the idea of a PSPS is there's no fire before. We turn the power off. It stays no fire. And when the wind event goes away, we patrol the lines and we restore the power.
They say that communication is 90% physical, only 10% speaking. You probably can tell I have a question. Okay. Seeing how this is supposed to limit liability for yourselves and because we got okay at us, I'm not seeing it, and I don't have a good answer for it. But you're now under legislative mandate. So when the body count is high, your computer modeling and your plans no longer are going to matter. Being an old Forest Service hotshot, you have two of the best hotshots known to man sitting right here. The communications capacities that you mentioned aren't going to work in areas that don't have Wi-Fi, don't have cell service. Perhaps the communication should be, before it all breaks out, is have a backup battery charged at all times for your device, as opposed to we'll contact you It's too late. It was blinking red when they woke up from their nap. All are understaffed, but have a plan for at the sheriff level for notifying people it's a mandatory evacuation. They know who to contact first. You need to work with them. The Forest Service has that capacity. Never mind their doctor somewhere in Billings. It's going to start happening. Have them know that you have a priority list. The Red Cross isn't going to go do that. The Salvation Army isn't going to go do that. And to have a center for them to go to isn't going to do that. Because and you guys are using this as your example constantly, the campfire fire. People tried to evacuate. The flames are 40 feet high. The brush on both sides of the roads was burning. Logs went across the road. They couldn't get their cars out. Their tires burned and they died in their cars. You need to have a physical plan, not a computer model plan, on how do we let these people know in advance. The Forest Service has an obligation, the sheriff has an obligation, and now you ask the legislature and you have an obligation. I'm not seeing it here. Or am I missing something?
Well, I think, first of all, the premise of the tragedy is already there. That's far different than what we're describing. Our mitigation plan is to avoid the tragedy altogether. It's on that day where there's no fire. We are communicating the same communications that we would normally connect with our customers are in play because they still have power. It's not the morning they wake up and we're going to shut them off that day. We're letting them know in advance, days in advance of a PSPS. And I appreciate the tragedy that you just described. That isn't the utilities expertise when that tragedy is there. And we have been working with all of the experts that you spoke to, sheriff's departments, wildfire, DNRC, BLM. We actively work with them when a tragic event or a catastrophic event or a wildfire is present. We are connected with their IT, or excuse me, their IC, their incident command teams. We always are there working with them. So I appreciate all that you just described. I'll push back a little bit to say there's two different events here. There's we're trying to prevent an event. That's the communication that we're talking about. That's the de-energization that's described within the bill. If there's an active fire, that's not a PSPS event, and may or may not. To us, that's a reactive situation. If the fire department or the fire teams need a segment of line de-energized, we will talk through that. There's impacts to that. And we'll talk through that and we'll make that decision just like we have done for as long as I've been here, 30 years.
I think you missed my point. You may have to have a de-energization plan to limit your liability. In your mind, limit your liability. Court and jury will decide that, not the legislature. So if the fire is started by your infrastructure, pole rated at 3 went down and started a fire. I don't see, and you never mentioned before that you were working with Forest Service. You didn't mention sheriff and their primary in this.
I haven't got to the communication section.
Well,
sorry about that.
In the part that you just mentioned.
Yes.
But when you go from your red alert to in effect on the in-between, is power turned off, is the fire started by your infrastructure. You need to have a rapid response plan and team in place, not a computer generated model. It would be my concern. And as this goes forward, I don't plan to let up on that. I would like to have something in the way of an answer other than the legislature didn't demand it.
I'll give you an answer, Mr. Chairman. You bet. Again, we do this correctly. There is no fire. That's the whole purpose of a PSPS, is to avoid the fire. Power goes out, the weather event comes through. When it's safe to do so and the weather event is now gone and we go back to probably still a dry climate, but absent the wind, typically is the key change. Absent that wind, we re-energize. And with you do need those models to be able to communicate, to be able to say, it looks like all of our weather models are showing us weather will be to your area at this time. We're not going to wait until that time to shut the power off. We're going to be a little conservative. We're going to shut off when it's not quite blowing so hard. And all our weather models tell us you'll be out for this duration until this time. So I do believe that this technology helps us with communication. And the whole idea of this mitigation is to avoid the fire in the first place. And I can tell you that from my experience, that if it is a fire and a fire threatening a community, often it's pretty unclear for days, weeks, sometimes years, what started the fire. So power line caused fire or not, if there's an active fire, I think Northwestern, along with everybody in the community that focuses in on the community during those tragic events, they're just working through what we always work through. And that's to do what we can to defend life and property.
That's all well and good, and I'm not going to belabor it, but quoting, I forget which general, he said your best battle plan always dissolves the second the first bullet is fired. And a heavyweight champion said, you can plan your opening bout all you want to, but the second they hit you in the nose, it falls apart. So what I'm saying is, and you can do what you want, it's your plan, and I'll vote for it as I see fit. But in effect, to say that we have an energizing, de-energizing plan, and therefore if the fire doesn't start, we're good. I'm saying that if your pole rated at 3 got coated, but the coating is above the ground and below the ground it rotted off, you're going to have a fire. You're going to have wind that blows a branch into a sub-distribution line and starts a fire. You're going to have fires, and they're going to come from you, even if they are God-caused. And there's going to be liability. And the whole idea of this exercise is the limitation of liability. And I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing, frankly, sir, a defense of if we have a plan and we work it, we're liability free. You're not. And because of the way the bill got structured, we're in it. And I don't want to see the liability go unaddressed. You're never going to get away from it. But I'm not seeing the after the fire starts liability addressed.
Well, I think that's incumbent in the law. The law, as written, allows for economic damages. And when we think about the bankruptcies that occurred with utilities and the liability aftermath, most of those utilities, and we're an example of that. We've had where we've started fires, we've had damages, and at an economic level, we've, just like the law states, we've dealt with those economic damages. The law, from my view, defends, if you will, liabilities around non-economic and punitive. That's the defense from the law and the liability perspective. Chairman, I can tell you, we will start fires. You're not going to have a power system as large as ours and not start fires. And it could create some, by our hope, by our expectation, by the work that we're doing, is to minimize those damages to something that can be dealt with economically and to deal with those damages. And as a company, we will deal with those damages for the fires we start. What we're trying to prevent is the fire. That tragic fire where you have to ask the question, should we have been operating? And if the question is, we probably shouldn't be, we use PSPS. Most of this summer, we had a good weather year from a fire mitigation perspective, but we still had systems that were in an EPSS state because we're trying to lower the energy for a fault when it'll occur, when that number 3 pole goes down for whatever reason. Those defenses are in place, and they're designed to reduce and mitigate the impact when we do start a fire. So the liability perspective, it's in law. I think the legislation's dealt with that. What we're trying to do is meet the requirements as a company that we're expected by that law. And yes, defend our company, but to defend the community and the citizens of this state as well and their property.
Mr. Merkel, I have a quick question before we go on, and you've probably answered it partially, and maybe you're going to answer it more fully. But I'm looking at this slide 25 with the watch warning alert, and it says communication up above guides your communication. Does that include communication with the Forest Service and the sheriff?
It does. And keep in mind that certainly the sheriff will understand when we're it may not with the Forest Service, depending where the location is. It may not directly involve them, but it would be for those parties, those agencies. In fact, we've held 2 wildfire summits in order to get the conversation going on what their needs are in terms of when they want to be communicated with. And those summits, I think, were fairly successful, very successful, actually, in getting those communications going. What does the agencies expect from us, and also to be able to have the conversation of what we expect from the agencies, and is our expectation real, or do we need to cover that another way? Thank you.
Mr. Merkel, on that subject, also, how are you communicating your decisions to the Public Service Commission?
When we go into this, we actually have a call list where we have, I would say, priority people within the state that if we're thinking about going into a PSPS, there's individuals that will call both commissioners. In fact, our CEO, Brian Bird, has committed. He'll call each of you specifically on our first PSPS. And if he can't, I will. And also, we would notify the commission staff through our regular processes, so they would be noticed as well. Moving along, and I'll move through the rest of this quickly, given time. Situational awareness, we've said this before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but this is actually a mobile network that informs our employees on what the risk level is for wherever their job site is. And they're able to understand what the risk level is and then be assured that they have all the right tools the required amount of water that we would require for that job site, that are usually a step above what the restriction requirements would be, all the way up to we're going to choose not to do the work depending on the risk level. Nate, would you describe a little bit about the tools that we have, because it's so important that we understand the environment, and would you touch on specifically what we didn't have in the early days that you feel we have today in terms of weather visibility and the work we still have to do?
Sure. So really, within Montana itself, there's not a robust weather monitoring station network. It's good, but could continue to be improved. And we early on recognized that the type of weather monitoring information we received really is produced for the general public. What is the general temperature going to be today? Do I need sunscreen? And what's the allergy rating? We needed a more specific systems that could help us understand very specifically our weather conditions along our system. And we've contracted with two different software vendors specifically on weather that help us make very custom reporting for our system. And we can start to narrow this down and understand what is the temperature, what is the wind speed, what are the wind gusts, along our network. We're not to the point where we can be as granular as our risk models. We don't have 34,000 weather monitoring zones out there, but we have a little over 600 zones that we monitor on a sub-minute basis. And so we can understand and use that information to help drive our decision making. You combine that with our also network of weather stations that we're starting to deploy, and we're putting those in our areas that carry higher risk, and that continues to build out and feed the models. And so not only is that available to us, it's available to the public as well, and to the National Weather Service, as they can also use those weather monitoring stations to help improve their models. So we have a number of different tools that internally, we have a meteorologist that reviews this every day to help us understand our risk from a weather perspective. Does that hit? Anything to add?
Yeah. The challenge that we have to deal with is often you guys will hear the red flag warning east of the divide. Well, that's a whole lot of miles for us. So we're driven to understand granularity, so that we can make decisions on why this power line would stay in power and this one would go out. And that's largely what Nate just described. I'm going to jump into this next slide, kind of on the heels of describing, we still expect to start fires. I've talked to that with the executive team. Again, what we're really trying to do is to avoid the fire, that tragic, catastrophic fire. We expect that power line systems will inherently start fires. We're working hard to reduce that possibility. But this whole program with the smoke detection cameras are because we understand we could still start fires. And really what we're trying to do is it's known amongst our firefighter partnerships that if you can get to a fire quickly before it really has a chance to grow, and within, the first couple hours of after an ignition, your likelihood to put out that fire goes up logarithmically. And it's also known that once a fire's been in place and it's been there for a time, the odds of it becoming a season fire, and in other words, it's going to take the change of the season to put out that fire, also goes up. We've had great success with smoke detection cameras. to my knowledge, we haven't detected yet a power line caused fire because we didn't have that many this year. But it's really helped the community. We've received great feedback from the agencies involved in firefighting, the DNRC communities such as Missoula, Red Lodge actually urged us to put a detection camera up in their area to help with all fires and to help with that early detection and suppression. It's been a great program so far, and we intend to build out more, and that's our next slide.
I jump in real quick. Where are your cameras mounted? Are they mounted on your transmission and distribution infrastructure or on a hilltop where they could see for a long ways? Old Forest Service lookout stations. How are they mounted and where?
Most all of our locations to date are on existing communication sites, communication towers. And the reason why we targeted them first is because the communication infrastructure is there. And really the only cost was the camera technology itself. The communication costs were far less because it already existed. As we begin to build out, that's going to be the ongoing challenge is what's it going to cost to get communication to the site that we want to put a camera where communications don't exist today. But in the first initial 20 cameras, Nate, or 20 locations, that'll be 40 cameras. They see 180 degrees. So it's 2 cameras per site. Those we've targeted areas within the state that already have communications. And interestingly, if you go back to the to our consequence model where the red was, or the higher risk tiers within our state, we're going to cover all of the high risk, and we're going to have substantial coverage on the medium risk with just those locations. You want to dive into this quickly? Just quickly.
So moving on to kind of, those were the short-term strategies. Those are the operational practices we'll deploy, based on that solid situational awareness foundation. Kind of moving in quickly into grid hardening programs. We have a number of different strategies that we have available and that we've deployed. The more traditional pole replacement, overhead to underground conversions. Commissioner Fielder, you spoke to that a little bit, right? All of these strategies are within our toolbox. And as our engineering team is assigned this risk priority based on the infrastructure resiliency model, they'll go out and do their assessment on the actual condition of that line and then recommend or put together a construction package which will address that risk specifically. So we have a number of different grid hardening tactics. We've increased our ground and aerial assessments. So that's going out and finding any exceptions or defects on the system that we can make small repairs on, using technology for additional engineering analysis, of course. And then Jason spoke a little earlier about power line technology, continuing to deploy electronic reclosures, and especially in locations where we've had the more historic hydraulic reclosures and updating the system. So lots going on in grid hardening. It does take a bit of time to get these all in place, but definitely need to continue to focus on our grid hardening strategies. Vegetation management, nothing too fancy. Oh,
Before you go on,
yeah.
just a question and back on slide 32. New framing standards, what do you mean by that?
You want me to kick that one to you, Randy?
Sure, I can take this one. So when we went through the infrastructure resiliency model, basically all of those red dots get handed off to an engineering team. They go out and they perform a kind of a field investigation of what is the risk present. So when they do that, they survey the line, they bring it back into their modeling software and determine if there's any conditions such as galloping, conductor slapping together based on the current framing standards to determine what is the appropriate mitigation. So is it to go to more current standards that we have today that eliminate that galloping, or would we, potentially be in a really heavily forested area that it would be better to go underground? So it's just kind of the engineer's discretion based on the modeling and the field investigation to determine what the appropriate mitigation is. That framing standard would be updating to today's today's standards.
Okay, thank you.
Regarding vegetation management, quickly, in Montana's operating area, obviously we have thousands and thousands of miles along a vegetated forest, and really this program just kind of increases and takes maybe a harder look at those risk trees along our edge of our right of ways. We want to be a little more aggressive with removals in particular. So we're investing in our vegetation management program. We're working with our landowners to say, let's get this vegetation, either out of the way or get you a more compatible species along the right of way, so that we don't have that accidental kind of tree failure into our line.
Question on that. Using the wet on the property and.
I would say it's improving quite a bit. Federal, state, all of those agencies we've built really good relationships with, and I feel like we've moved the needle quite a bit over the last decade. We still at times can run into individual landowners that can be problematic. One avenue we've had a lot of success is continuing to work with those rural fire departments. A lot of those kind of local neighbors understand kind of their particular issue they're in, and see if we can find a way forward to help through that maintenance program.
What I do when I final. Wildfire plan.
I don't think you can, push out a wildfire mitigation plan without being a team. There's a lot of stakeholders involved, from the commissioners to our federal and state agencies to our communities. I would say it's going to take all of us to help mitigate wildfire risks.
You're expecting input from this. Accepted.
Certainly, yes.
Let's start here. There's a guy in Lewistown, and he says, hey, trees are right in the line. All asked the grass tree. And his answer that he got was no. I said, well, look, why should you make a complaint here? And, we worded this, it's just an option for us to look into it and ask questions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So he did. His name was Lonnie Bergstrom, and then they came in and decided, okay, we'll cut it. No question. But then they left all the trees cut on the ground. So they said, look, I'm a pretty old guy, and it's unremovable. So he called me, and I think this is a good example of the landowner reached out to the public service. And they would get the trimming done and then trim and move.
Mm-hmm.
This was a couple of years ago. But it surprised me because it really have to do a good job moving, getting that vegetation. The reason this was specifically interesting is the fire just a few miles from there, Denton, Montana.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few months after. So that seemed pretty concerned. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And working with people like Zolnikov, he's expecting me to say, well, if you have a chance to voice some improvement, you better do that, because my idea is that you're working together with Northwestern Energy.
Sure.
So a few months ago, we we're having a hearing here. The question I had was, what are we doing with our vegetation management different today? We were, say, a year.
Mhm.
There wasn't a good answer
Hmm.
yet, and that it could be somebody had it but didn't have it ready. But what I'm thinking of is vegetation is going to be cut farther away from the power line than it was before, right? Also, Montana has some real challenges. We have some very dry areas, which grow very slowly, but are very dry. And then we have areas like Kalispell that are almost like jungle, that the moisture level is so high, vegetation can grow inches a day, right? But when that vegetation hits the line, it's usually moist, right? Dry vegetation, it's fire hazard, right? So I see that we have areas that we have to watch this excessive growth, and then we've got to watch areas that are excessively dry. We making changes in those requirements, and we must be, because we've labeled it advanced vegetation management. Tell me what's advanced about it.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Commissioner. And I apologize if we didn't get your question answered from the last session. So hopefully we'll get some of this kind of solved today. A couple of things that we're, how we've improved our program. Well, let me back up for a second. We're starting at a good spot. Although I completely understand that you'll get complaints from landowners on vegetation. I will say that nothing seems to get our customers a little more excited than some aggressive trimming. So we are well aware of that these things are living, and they mean a lot to customers. They provide a lot of value to properties. So I don't want to take that away, but at the same time, they also are well known to be vegetation is one of the highest type of faults and cause outages on our system. So we want to manage that to the best we can within our right of way. So within our right of way, we want to continue to have that increased focus on any dead, dying, and any tree that may become a risk to us. Then we're also extending that look outside of the right of way. Many of our easements allow us to trim and remove vegetation outside the right of way, which may pose a hazard to the electric network. So that increased focus, we're doing it. How are we doing that? We're using technologies such as satellite scans. There's a number of vendors out there that now can scan the system using satellite technology. And we're also using LiDAR scans. So LiDAR is a little more precise and can pick up both the conductor location and the vegetation location and give you a little bit more analysis on fall-in risks. There are other scans. I mean, you continue to add on things that can understand the tree health through the chlorophyll in the leaves. I mean, there's more and more you could do, but you have to continue to narrow down where do you want to deploy these strategies. So definitely adding on a lot of that technology and adding on, more saws into wood, honestly, taking more wood down if we need to.
What about changing the standards where trees are not allowed by law? This came up in Florida. Floridians want to camouflage the power lines with palm trees.
Mhm.
They really like their palm trees, and it adds value to palm tree adds like $50,000 property. They really are excited about it hiding the power line. Of course, that problems with vegetation or animals on the palm tree then touching the line, right?
Mhm.
So if you really want to get serious, we have to remove the palm tree away from the line. They're just, I guess they're willing to pay for those fires and for those problems because they want those trees around those lines. But in Montana, I like to think we're smarter than that. A lot of the time, as I'm driving on the rural routes of Montana, and I see a tree by a power line, I don't think anyone is going to care whether it's there or not. Do you think we could do a greater job, or should we come out with maybe more aggressive legislation? If there's a tree that's not near a house adding value, it's a tree that's out in the field, doesn't really add value to the property. If we say we have the power to remove it completely, I would say this might make your job easier. What are your thoughts there? And have you guys thought about bringing this up in your discussion?
Hello, Commissioner. Thank you. Um, uh, good question. And, I think for the purposes of today's conversation, um, I'm interested in understanding the possibility to have those things, to have law or legislation that allows us easier access to do the work that we need to do as you just described. That is something potentially we could partnership on a going forward basis. I will say, however, I believe that the pine beetle epidemic, I remember we used to have much more resistance to cutting down trees and whatnot prior to that. While we were trying to go in and solve the issue, because many of the trees, they didn't look dead, but they were going to be dead, or they were dead and dying. They were diseased to the point that their mortality was more than probable. So we went through once, and then when they realized the tree is dead, I'm talking privately owned lands, it helped promote the idea of we need to clear this vegetation, and you need a qualified person to do so. So even having gone through that, I think for the general population of Montana understands the need um, for tree trimming and mitigation. And although to Nate's point, I know that we have property owners out there that we have conflicts with. But when I think about the number of properties that our tree crews are on each year, we have very few problems. The example that you brought up, I remember that example, and we probably didn't address it the way he would like in the initially. I heard you say we said no. We said no, but and what we do try to do when we get individual calls of, hey, this is a problem, we'll go out and assess it, and to try to be as efficient as we can with the crews. If that circuit or that line segment is on the schedule and coming up, and we believe that the risk is such that we can wait, then there's often times where we'll ask the customer, or we'll push the customer to, we'll be back at this point when our crews are there, just to try to be as efficient as we can. Now, sometimes, and it sounds like in this case, sometimes it just drives us to go deal with the issue. But with that, we're about running out of time, and I'd really like to get to the communication component of this. So I'm going to move on. This won't take but a few minutes, because we've talked about, or we've talked around a lot of the things that we're doing with communication. We're working with certainly all the agencies first and foremost. That's kind of where we started. The public agencies that are either adjacent to or at the front end of wildfire mitigation. What you see here on slide, the numbers covered 36, I believe it is. That's our website, and it's been totally revamped. I invite you all to go out to under safety on our website, and you can see all of the tools that we have out there to communicate to the public what we're doing, why we're doing it, on whatever the subject matter is. Communicating to customers, we've used a number of fronts. We've sent direct mailers to the 38,000 customers, or excuse me, 30,000 customers, which would be about 10% of our customers. We sent direct mailers if we've identified them as being in a high risk area. And our purpose was to communicate with them, to introduce them to the idea of PSPS, and that because they're in a high risk area, they have a higher likelihood that their power would be shut off due to wildfire weather conditions. So it was an introductory letter, and we will send that out annually um, to notify those customers. We've also, knowing that there's risk all through Montana, we've also communicated through paid advertising, and it's hit social media and TV and in all of those platforms. We also hired a wildfire manager of wildfire communications, and he actually hits the road on a grassroots level, townhouse type meetings. He'll meet with communities such as Clancy. He was there just not too long ago, describing about Northwestern Energy's wildfire plan and PSPS. Town hall kind of meetings at a grassroots level. This is an area that, and it's probably going to reveal my engineering nature. We all tend to overlook what it's going to take to communicate. I thought I had an idea, and then I was corrected by the world. And it seems like you can't do enough here. That resonates with me. And we're always looking for opportunities to get to the various stakeholders, whether it's that customer or in that higher risk community. If it's supporting agencies on helping customers with defensible spaces, we're trying to be everywhere for our community to the extent that we can. And we're always open to new ideas and invites of the next meeting we can attend to talk about this subject. On slide 39, you'll see this is our 2025 outreach and what our efforts have yielded. So with that, I just want to leave you all with this. I'm very proud of Northwestern Energy and where we've come in a short period of time. Not so many years ago, just 3-4 years ago, we certainly were not positioned to mitigate wildfire and wildfires caused by power lines. As we were looking at everything that it felt like the industry was doing and everything that we believed we needed to do, one thing that we kept coming back to is it right for Montana? There's a lot of plans out there. California has their plans. Their plans are awesome, and they're great for California. They don't necessarily overlap with what we need to do in our service territory. And we've also put, we've looked at risk, we've evaluated risk, and as we showed you today, we developed risk from a power line perspective and from Northwestern Energy's lens that's specific to power line ignited wildfires. We've developed our strategies. We've leveraged our strengths, our history of having sound, reliability-focused programs. We leveraged those. And we've focused hard on developing the areas where we had opportunity. And as I described today, that was situational awareness and to have systems that we could adjust quickly to change the way they operate to account for the changing environment. that can change hour to hour. We have a multi-layered mitigation approach. And I think the program that the IRM, the infrastructure resiliency model that was developed by our asset management team, again, it's coveted by other utilities. Our approach is to get to the risk. And you can't get to the risk with just one tool in the toolbox. And then prioritizing, understanding what portion of our system, with a system of 25,000 miles that has different needs, different environment. I think it's a state-of-the-art approach to utility wildfire mitigation. Our plan is customer and community focused. And we've been communicating. You can never communicate enough. I'll be the first to say that. We have more to do there. But much of Montana knows and understands what we're doing. And I would also say they've benefited by what we've done. Specifically from smoke detection, we will provide weather data that is not available through this sparse state that can be used for others in the public. Our plan was designed to meet the industry standard that's out there in terms of the categories that we focused on. And it's our belief that this plan meets the requirements of House Bill 490. And we look forward to your comment. And more importantly, I look forward to your approval of our plan. Thank you.
I have a question. Before we adjourn, I believe we were supposed to adjourn 2 minutes ago, but this won't take long. I requested to our legal counsel, it's been said and it's footnoted in your deal here, you have an agreement with the Forest Service. I've asked what that agreement is. I have not received any response. And Northwestern has done a study of the source of ignition that's been referenced here. I asked for the in-house communications of the study on sources of ignition on the, I believe it was 38 wildfires, concerning maybe one would be Denton, and you would want to have a protective order on that or any other part of it. To my knowledge, we have not received a protective order request, and I certainly have not received the information. When can I expect those?
Please.
A new participant, welcome aboard.
Commissioner, I'm not aware of what request you're talking about. We did receive a request from you for some contracts, and we did file a motion for protective.
I checked with Lucas this morning. I've been out for a while. Couldn't see anything, couldn't read anything. Didn't make any difference if I was here or not. I asked Lucas if those had been sent. He said that so far as the source of ignition went, there was some concern over Denton, which apparently some of the settlements there were non-disclosure, and that a protective order request was forthcoming. That's all I know. It was a quick 2-minute conversation with Lucas this morning.
Okay, we have submitted a request for protective order on all requests that we have received. So maybe if you could follow up with Lucas on anything that you asked other than the contracts, because we have not received any requests other than the contracts.
Maybe you could check with Lucas.
Okay, I'll check with Lucas.
Before you leave, instead of
Okay,
I talk to him and then I tell him to call you again.
that works.
We could just leave out the middleman, and that's me.
Thank you. I'll do that.
Closely with you.
But specifically, just in general with wildfire?
I understand. Fire risk, if that's going on, when's that meeting happen?
Well, first, to answer your question, you can work with me on any subject. And if I'm not the right individual, I'll definitely get you pointed to the right person within our company.
All the Russian olive grove power lines inundated. Most of which is a cooperative. Also, the new fire risk map has increased in size quite a bit, what they claim is fire risk. I noticed that in California, so I think there's 2 fire risk maps out. One's bigger than the other, and which one are we using, and who has the right to increase our fire risk? Also, homeowners insurance policies have went up because they're claiming that the fire risk now is different, so everybody's policy is going up in price. Work a little bit of Jim Brown on that. So these are great questions. So looking forward to it. Do you think that I'd like to see encouraging removal of trees? Trimming a tree is nothing but a problem because you have to deal with trimming up later. If you move the tree, then you remove the problem. But really in support of moving as many trees as can, so they're just not there at all. And I think in a lot of areas, landowners won't care. Those areas that do, of course, will handle that. Well, thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for your time today. Appreciate all of your time. Thank you.